All right. Hello again, everyone. This is part two of your Wednesday lecture while I am in Toronto. Basically, part two is about phase three of the term project, which I handed out to you on Monday morning. Just a few moments ago, actually, I sent you all of the data files. And if I were going to be there on Wednesday, we would spend a little bit of time discussing this. So, first step, of course, read the assignment carefully. Okay, you have copies of this on paper. You now have digital copies as well. Make sure you read them over. What I would like you to do initially is to go to the page of schemas together with this sort of hacked together ER diagram. Again, hacked together because this uses the Chen notation but does not include all of the little bubbles and so on. Mainly because all the bubbles are in the schemas that I've given you. So the first thing I'd like you to do with your team is just first of all familiarize yourselves with this. Obviously, this is simplified from the extended ER diagram that I required you to do for phase one, and then convert into schemas, normalized schemas for phase two. So first of all, convince yourselves that this is a true translation of the ER diagram. First of all, that it's valid to the project itself, which you're pretty familiar with by now. Okay, there are some things here that I've simplified in my EER diagram that you translated already. For example, there were, potential customer and buyer were parent and child in a specialization hierarchy. I've taken that out. Um, uh, and so on and so forth. So I want you always, even though we're doing this project, to be reinforcing all of the underlying concepts. Okay, so make sure you take a look at this and make sure that you still feel like it's a faithful model of the specifications that I gave you, and then compare them to the schemas. Sort of reverse engineering, if you will, the translation from the ER diagram and the normalization. As you'll see, in the end, I ended up doing just a couple of different things with the normalization, which is basically I created a zips relation, and that was pretty much the only new relation that I created because the model itself was pretty strong to begin with. The other thing that I did here, as you'll see, I've listed, is that I did create several surrogate keys. For instance, the artwork is defined based on the specification as being a weak entity, but it's artwork for Pete's sake. It's one of the main things in the entire data system. So I did go ahead and create an artwork ID for that. And I did the same with some of the others, especially the ones, some of them where, the buyer had a name before, potential customer had a name before, went ahead and made some surrogate keys for that. You should not, I know I have not graded your phase two work yet. You should not be concerned if you didn't do that in phase two. In fact, I didn't want you to do it in phase two. The whole idea there was to do a true and faithful translation from the EER diagram that I gave you. But of course, if you use some flexibility, that's fine. I do hope, let me just say, by the time you're watching this, hopefully you do have phase two back. I'm going to try to get that done tomorrow before I leave on the trip. The other thing to mention is that I did not put sale total and salesperson commission in the sale entity here. Those I decided would be calculated or derived attributes that are not actually stored. So notice that those would be in the ER diagram if I were to draw that with all of the attributes. But then, since they're not going to be stored, they're left out of the sale relation. So again, look these over first with your team, okay, and ask me whatever questions you have. Is this a true model? Although simplified from before, is this a true model of what we've been talking about in phase one and phase two? Then basically, the next step you're going to take is to use the files that I sent you. Let me go and find those. Okay, here is the data definition language commands for the art gallery. You'll notice that you can do these multiple times. So I included drop table commands at the beginning in case you have some of these tables existing already. And then after that, you create the tables in the normalized tables with basically all the attributes shown on the previous page, on the page that I gave you, together with all the constraints, including primary keys, including foreign keys, all kinds of different specifications here as we go through. Once again, don't just copy and paste this into, let's see, this is Oracle. There's also a MySQL version because they're not exactly the same, which I, again, spent quite a bit of time over break to discover what the differences were between Oracle and MySQL here. But basically, look these through once again as part of the learning process and make sure that you see how each one of these is going to create exactly the table from the normalized schemas. And then you get another nice little file that I've created to hopefully make life really easy for you. Okay, that's the data. Okay, and here again, just made up data that I believe I have tested. It's going to work just fine as you run this and put it into your new tables. Now, I mentioned this briefly, this idea of an Oracle sequence briefly in the lecture right before spring break. I'm going to come back to that in part 3 of the lecture for Wednesday. Basically, these are Oracle sequences. You'll note, I'm not going to bring it up, but you'll note if you look at the data for MySQL, it uses auto-increment. Instead of using a defined sequence that basically gives you the next value every time you do an insert, I use for MySQL, I use auto increment. I just make artist ID auto increment, and then I just leave it out of the insert artist statement, and then same thing for the other sequences. That's the kind of thing that could be on exam 2. What is a sequence? What is auto increment? What's the difference between the two? So here's a place where the sort of some advanced SQL techniques are right there for you to practice in the term project. But again, it emphasizes the point that I would like you to read these files. Don't just copy and paste them. And again, fingers crossed that they'll work. I think they will, but then you're all set and ready to go. Okay, and then what you do then is head on back to the assignment again, which you have of course read over carefully. Make sure everything makes sense. What you're going to do is to create select statements for all of the necessary reports. So if you'll recall, one more time, let's go here to the project specification. For example, report number 6 was a report of active artists. Not the hardest possible query for you to write, okay? You do have to figure out in PHP, Java, or Python, whatever you're using, how to access the current date, so you can specify that. But otherwise, come on. This is basically all of the attributes directly from the artist table. I promise you, some of the others are a little bit trickier, but not terrible. Again, I'm trying to model sort of a real-life enterprise for you here that you're going to create the database for. And then, as you'll recall from your reading, I've created 5 additional queries that are a little bit harder. No harder than the lab that you did, which I also will try to get graded before I leave for Toronto. But maybe a little bit trickier than some of those reports. And then lastly, you're going to create a SQL trigger to update well, you can read what it says there. That will update the amount of the buyer's purchases year to date whenever a sale is completed. Once again, that gives me a nice segue to, as I was talking about sequences before, we'll talk about triggers in my next little lecture chunk. In fact, that's the main topic is triggers. So don't worry that you haven't seen those before or that you only read them in chapter 8 and you're not sure what's going on, okay? Do the Friday after this one. And grading is basically going to be, correct SQL implementations, but also on populating the tables a little bit more, okay? And I specify, I think, what did I say, 2 or 3? At least 2 or 3 more rows in each of the tables. Again, just to make the queries a little bit more interesting, leave the ones in there that the rows that I put in, so I can, that helps me with grading when I'm running your queries. That I should see, I know which rows that I should see. So in addition to any new ones that you put in. All right. Again, can't ask for questions in a one-way video here, but you know, I will be checking my email regularly while I'm gone, and I'd love to hear your questions. So, phase 3. There's only one phase to go after this, and we've been working hard on that stuff already. So, very good. I'll see you in a couple minutes for the last part of today's lecture.